The Messerschmitt Me 410 Hornisse was a German heavy fighter and Schnellbomber used by the Luftwaffe during World War II. Though essentially a straightforward modification of the Me 210, it was designated the Me 410 to avoid association with its notoriously flawed predecessor. Design and development of the Me 210 had been underway since 1939, but the aircraft proved extremely unstable and was never considered for full-scale production. Modifications to the layout produced the Me 210C and 210D, which proved somewhat superior. As studies progressed on the Me 210D, it was instead decided to introduce a new model, the Me 410. The major change between the Me 210 and 410 was the introduction of the larger and more powerful Daimler-Benz DB603A engines, which increased power to 1,750 picoseconds compared to the 1,475 picoseconds DB605s used on the Me 210C. The engine performance increased the Me 410's maximum speed to 625 km per hour, greatly improved rate of climb, service ceiling, and most notably the cruising speed, which jumped to 579 km per hour. It also improved payload capability to the point where the aircraft could lift more warload than could fit into the bomb bay under the nose. To address this, shackles were added under the wings for 450 kg bombs. The changes added an extra 680 kg to the Me 210 design, but the extra engine power more than made up for the difference. The new version included a lengthened fuselage and new, automatic leading-edge slats, both of which had been tested on Me 210s and were found to dramatically improve handling. The slats had originally been featured on the earliest Me 210 models, but had been removed on production models due to poor handling. When entering a sharp turn, the slats had a tendency to open, due in part to the turn causing a drop in air pressure at the leading edge of the wings. Analogous to the low-pressure activation, the slats were designed for a slow landing approach, which added to the problems keeping the aircraft flying smoothly. However, when the problems with the general lateral instability were addressed, this was no longer a real problem. The wing panels of the earlier Me 210 had been designed with a planform geometry that placed the aerodynamic center in a rearwards direction in comparison to the earlier Bf 110, giving the outer sections of the wing planform beyond each engine nacelle a slightly greater, 12.6 degree leading-edge sweepback angle than the inner panel's 6.0 degree leading-edge sweep angle. This resulted in unreasonable handling characteristics in flight for the original Me 210 design. The new Me 410 outer wing panels had their planform geometry revised to bring the aerodynamic center further forwards in comparison to the Me 210, thus making the leading-edge sweepback of the outer panels identical to the inner wing panels, with both having identical 5.5 degree sweepback angles, which improved handling. Deliveries began in January 1943, 2 years later, and continued until September 1944, by which point a total of 1,160 of all versions had been produced by Messerschmitt Augsburg and Dornier Ma 1/4 NCHEN. When it arrived, it was liked by its crews, even though its improved performance was not enough to protect it from the swarms of high-performance Allied fighters they faced at this stage of the war. Operational history. The Me 410 night bomber proved to be an elusive target for the RAF night fighters. The first unit to operate over the UK was Volt per kilogram 2, which lost its first Me 410 on the night of July 14, 1943, when it was shot down by a de Havilland Mosquito of No. 85 Squadron RAF. The Me 410 was also used as a bomber-destroyer against the daylight bomber formations of the USAAF, upgraded through the available UMRA 1/4 ST Borza currencies of factory conversion kits, all bearing a /U suffix. For the designer these suffixes could vary in meaning between subtypes. As one example, the earlier Me 410A1/U1 designation signified a camera fitting in the under-nose ordnance bay for reconnaissance use, while the same /U1 designation or the later Me 410B2 signified a mount of a pair of the long-barreled, 30mm caliber Mk103 cannon in the under-nose ordnance bay. The /U2 suffix designated a fitment of 2 additional 20mm MG151/20 cannons in the undernose ordnance bay instead. The A1/U4 subtype fitted the massive, 540 kg weight Balkan-owned Series 50mm BK5 cannon, loaded with 21 rounds in the same undernose ordnance bay in place of either the /U1's cameras or Mk103s, or the /U2's added pair of MG151/20 autocannon. For breaking up the bomber formations, many Me-410s also had 4 underwing tubular launchers, 2 per wing panel, firing converted 21 cm worth of Granite 21 infantry barrage rockets. 2 Geschwader, Zlister paragraph Geschwader 26 and 76, were thus equipped with the Me-410 by late 1943. They were moderately successful against unescorted bombers through 1943, with a considerable number of kills against USAAF day bomber formations being achieved. However, the Me-410 was no match in a dogfight with the lighter Allied single-engine fighters such as the North American P-51 Mustang and Supermarine Spitfire. In early 1944, the Me-410 formations encountered swarms of Allied fighters protecting the bomber streams, usually flying far ahead of the combat box formations as an air supremacy move in clearing the skies of any Luftwaffe opposition, resulting in the Me-410's previous successes against escorted bombers now often being offset by their losses. An example of this was part of a campaign started 2 days earlier by the USAAF. Was on March 6, 1944 during an attack on Berlin by 758th AF heavy bombers, when 16 Me-410s were shot down in return for 8 B-17s and 4 P-51s. The following month on April 11, with 8th AF raids hitting Soru, Rostock and Eschursleben, 2 ZG-26's Me-410s accounted for a rare success, initially bringing down 10 B-17s without any losses. During the course of the same raid, their second sortie was intercepted by P-51s that destroyed 8 Me-410s and 3 Bf-110s. 16 crewmen were killed and 3 wounded. From mid-1944, despite being Hitler's favorite bomber-destroyer, the Me-410 units were taken from defense of the Reich duties and production was phased out in favor of heavily armed single-engine fighters as dedicated bomber-destroyers, with the Me-410s remaining in service flying on reconnaissance duties only. Some Me-410s were used with Junkers Ju-188s during the Battle of Normandy, for high-altitude night reconnaissance. Variants: the basic A-series aircraft were armed with 2 7.92mm MG-17 machine guns and 2 20mm MG-151/20 cannons in the nose and delivered as the Me-410A1 light bomber. The originally planned Me-410A2 heavy fighter was cancelled because the dual 30mm Mk103 cannon mount, also available for the later Me-410B2 subtype as the aforementioned UMRA 1/4 ST Bosat/U1 factory ordnance upgrade available by 1944, was not ready in time. The Me-410A featured a bomb bay for carrying air-to-ground ordnance or for the installation of additional air-to-air weaponry or other equipment. Initially, 3 UMRA 1/4 ST Borza currencies were available. U1 contained a pallet of cameras for the photo reconnaissance role, U2 2 20mm MG-151/20 cannon with 250 RPG for the heavy fighter use, and U4 used the 50mm Balkan-owned series weapon, the BK5 cannon with 22 rounds, to turn either an Me-410A or B series aircraft into a dedicated bomber-destroyer. The BK5 cannon, derived from the Panzer III tank's main armament, the 50mm KWK-39L/60, allowed the Me-410s to shoot at their targets from over 914 m, a distance at which the bomber's defensive armament, usually consisting of the light barrel, .50 caliber AN-M2 aviation version of the M2 Browning machine guns, was useless. Frequent problems with jamming and limited ammunition supply, together with the extra 540 kg weight of the large caliber gun under the nose, made the other anti-bomber versions of Me-410, especially those with extra 20mm MG-151/20s, much more useful. The dedicated reconnaissance version Me-410A3 received a deeper fuselage for additional cameras and fuel. The Me 410A3 entered service in small numbers in early 1944, and equipped 3 long-range reconnaissance AUFKLA currency Rungstafel reconnaissance squadrons, usually assembled with other recon squadrons as parts of larger, 3 or 4 squadron Fernofkala currency Rungsgruppen. The Me 410B series was largely the same as the A series, but replaced the pair of 7.92mm MG-17s with a pair of the harder-hitting 13mm MG-131 machine guns. The originally planned 1,900 horsepower DB603G engine was cancelled in early 1944, so all Me 410BS used DB603A or DB603AA engines. The DB603G would have increased the maximum speed to 630 km per hour, and cruising speed to 595 km per hour, although the weights increased once again. The versions were the same as with the A series, the Me 410B1, and Me 410B3 filling the same roles as the earlier A1 and A3 versions, also with the options of using the same UMRA 1/4 ST Borza currencies of factory conversion kits as the A series aircraft used. Several experimental models were also developed. The Me 410B5 added shackles under the fuselage to carry a torpedo, and removed the MG-131s in the nose to make room for the FUG 200 Hontwheel 550 MHz UHF brand maritime patrol radar. The bomb bay was not used in this version in order to make room for a 650L fuel tank, and the rearward-firing remote turrets were replaced by another 700L fuel tank for long-range missions. The Me 410B6 was a similar anti-shipping conversion, but intended for the short-range coastal defense role only. For this mission, it did not use a torpedo, and was instead a simple modification of the B1 with the FUG 200 radar. The Me 410B7 per Byte 8 were updated B3 reconnaissance models that we only built as prototypes. The Me 410C was a high-altitude version drawn up in early 1944, with 2 new wing designs that increased span to 18.25 m or 20.45 m. The larger wings allowed the gear to retract directly to the rear. A new universal engine mount would allow for the use of any of the DB603JZ or BMW 801J turbocharged engines or the Jumo 213E two-stage mechanically supercharged engines, driving a new 4-blade propeller with very wide blades. The BMW 801 radials were air-cooled and the DB603 and Jumo 213 used an annular radiator, all housed as unitized Craft A engine modules onto an airframe for ease of installation and field maintenance, so the normal underwing radiators were removed. None were ever built, as Me 410 production was cancelled before the engines matured. The Me 410D was a simpler upgrade to the B series to improve altitude performance, but not to the same degree as the C series. It would be powered by the DB603JZ engines, and had a revised forward fuselage to increase the field of view of the pilot and reduce drag. It also replaced portions of the outer wing panels with ones made of wood to conserve strategic materials. Several were built, but like many other attempts at reconstruction by the German aviation industry late in World War II, the loss of the Goldschmidt-Tego film factory in Wuppertal, in a Royal Air Force nighttime bombing raid, meant the acidic replacement adhesives available were too corrosive to the materials being bonded, and the wooden portions tended to fail. Production was eventually cancelled to concentrate on Bf-109GS in August 1944, after 1,160 Me 410s had been built, the month after the JAR currency Gurnit program had gone into effect. Operators: Germany, Luftwaffe was Me 410 main operator during 1943-45, Stabsschwarm 2. F/AUFKLA currency Rungsgruppe 22, 1. F/AUFKLA currency Rungsgruppe 33, 1. F/FAGA 121, 1, 2, Egdo, 5. F/AUFKLA currency Rungsgruppe 122, Zenitgruppe 80, 9, 20. /ZG1 Wespen, 2, 4, 6, Stab ZG26 Horst Vessel, 1, 2, 3, /ZG76, Eprobens Commando /Z. 25, 5. Nact, 14. Nact, 15, 16. /KG2, 1. JAGD, 2. Nact, 5. KG51 Edelweiss, 1. /NJG5, 3. /NJG1. United Kingdom, Royal Air Force received at least 2 captured aircraft during war and shortly after. Number 1426 Flight RAF operated a single Me-410A1/U-2 during the war. Soviet Union, Soviet Air Force tested at least 1 captured Me-410B2/U-4 after the war. Surviving aircraft. 2 Me-410s survive today, Me-410A1/U-1, this aircraft held by the American National Air and Space Museum and stored awaiting restoration, at the Pauli Garber Preservation, Restoration, and Storage Facility. It was found intact at an airfield in Trapani, Sicily, in August 1943 and was shipped to the United States in 1944. It was given the U.S. serial number FE499. Me-410A1/U-2, this aircraft is part of the collection of the RAF Museum and is publicly displayed at the Royal Air Force Museum Cusford. It was built in late 1943 by Messerschmitt in Augsburg. There is evidence it served with sister paragraph Registrada 26 before being surrendered at Velos, Denmark in May 1945. It was one of 6 Me-410s that were taken to the UK in 1945 for evaluation, but the only one to be later selected for preservation and to avoid being scrapped. It underwent restoration in 1986, after which both engines were successfully run on the ground. It was moved to Cusford in 1989 and has remained there since. Specifications. General characteristics: crew, 2, length, 12.4 meters, wingspan, 16.39 m, height, 3.7 m, wing area, 36.20 mass squared, empty weight, 6,150 kilograms, max takeoff weight, 10,760 kilograms, power plant, TUA, Daimler-Benz DB603A liquid-cooled V12 engine, 1,750 picoseconds each, performance, maximum speed, 624 km per hour, range, 2,300 km combat, service ceiling, 10,000 m, climb to 6,000 m, 10.7 minutes, armament. Guns, TUA, 7.92 mm MG-17 machine guns with 1000 RPG, firing forward, TUA, 20 mm MG-151/20 cannons with 350 RPG, firing forward, TUA, 13 mm MG-131 machine guns with 500 RPG, each firing rearward from FDSL-131 first-SB remote-operated turret, 1 per side. Rockets, 4x 21 cm were for Granite 21 rockets, bombs, up to 1,000 kg of disposable stores. See also, related development, Messerschmitt Me 210, Messerschmitt Me 310, aircraft of comparable role, configuration and era, Messerschmitt Bf 110, Bristol Beaufighter, de Havilland Mosquito, Kawasaki Ki 102, Northrop P-61 Black Widow, Ryukyugun Ki 93. References, notes. Bibliography. External links, German WW2 Manual for Me-410A1/U4's Balkan-own BK-5 cannon installation, Me-410 at the Royal Air Force Museum, Cusford, U.S. Intelligence Report on Me-410 at LoneSentry.com.